Alrighty, guys, welcome to Optimizing Forward, guys, where we discuss all things optimize related. So, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and answer a question here. It'll be like 15 minutes probably, and then we're gonna do some other stuff today. I have a pretty bad headache today. So like one of the questions I got from my last video. I'm actually gonna pull this up real quick. So pretty much what the question is asking is capitalism immoral, right? It's a interesting question, which we'll kind of get into here. I'm pretty tired today, but it's an interesting question. Thank you for so much for this, brother. Doesn't that make capitalism immoral? Also, you mentioned earlier that you do see its impending demise. So yeah, guys, this is an interesting question, right? Is capitalism going to like go away, right? So it's a fairly interesting question. I'm not going to go too far into the political component side, but what I will say, right, is if we think about moral action, like what is right and what is wrong, we have to think about, basic, like, so what kind of defines moral from immoral, right, is basically self-interest, and then self-interest that is taken too far, right? That's kind of the dividing line between the two. And like there's nothing wrong with having self-interest. You can have self-interest, but the dividing line is going to be how far you're taking your self-interest at the expense of others. Okay, that's kind of what dictates that. Is it important to know, I would say, in terms of the economic market, the economic system, in terms of you being competitive? I would say it depends, right? So I would say that, are most people moral human beings? The answer is no. I know, like, I would say people are what's called minimally moral. People are moral in the sense that they do it as basic courtesies. They'll say hello, they'll say hi, they'll say how you're doing, they'll say whatever, but they're not really gonna do deep moral philosophical thinking. I mean, to be real with you, most people aren't capable of that, but yeah, so to be real with you, realistically, right? I would say that, like most people are not moral, at least by my standard, right? And one of these things that is critical, especially in deontology, is the notion of the ontological imperative. So let's look at kind of what the definition of the ontological imperative is. This is one of the things I was fairly obsessed with for a very long time, was the ontological imperative. This is something Kant wrote a very long time ago. The term the ontological imperative is not a standard formal concept, but rather a blend of ontology, the study of being, and the categorical imperative. It generally refers to an absolute, unconditioned requirement rooted in the very nature of existence or reality, rather than just a moral rule. Treating existence or the preservation of being as a fundamental duty, right? And that's pretty much what deontology is. It's the philosophy of duty, the existential drive, the inner desire of a living being to grow and express its reality. Okay, so these are intrinsic components of the ontological imperative, which is the ontological imperative, right? The categorical imperative, moral attaining that you must do it because it is right. A supposed rule or push that comes to effect that exists and must act within the line of reality. So the dividing line between what you must do because it is right versus what you must do because you exist are very fundamentally linked. The ontological imperative versus the categorical imperative are only different within the sense of the moral motivation as to why you do things, right? The most core moral motivations, if you will, are those motivations that are intrinsic to your being. Now, if you go back to capitalism, right? Capitalism is nothing more than mercantilism with currency that is exchanged between one another through the exchange of labor. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith talks about this. He talks about the notion that labor, as you do labor, you mix your labor You mix value and time with your labor, which therefore entitles you to money or a currency that measures the utility value of what you're doing, right? So, is capitalism immoral? The answer is yes, it is immoral. Okay. And the simplest answer why that is the case is because there is no moral structure built into capitalism. Capitalism basically doesn't give a fuck, right? Capitalism is like, what is supply? What is demand? What is elastic supply, elastic demand? You have your supply curve, you have your demand curve, and then this kind of dictates the rest of the structure of what's going on, right? Capitalism doesn't give a shit about law. It doesn't give a fuck about rules. It only cares about maximizing profits and production. And for the most part, capitalism has been one of the most successful systems in human history. Everyone is more wealthy than in human history. There's more things, there's more expertise, there's more specialization, right? But it's not a moral system. It's not the best system. This is one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make. They would like to believe that because capitalism is the only system that we've had that is better than mercantilism, it's better than feudalism, it's better than all these other systems. Therefore, it is the absolute end all be all system. And that is not the case, right? And pretty much Adam Smith wrote another book in combination with The Wealth of Nations called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Actually, I still kind of want to read this book, but so we'll go over the summary of this. So Adam Smith was well versed in moral ontology, moral theology, right? So this is what it says. Published in 1759, the theory of moral sentiments argues that human morality springs from natural social empathy rather than the strict reason or divine command. The book refers to three concepts: sympathy, the impartial spectator, and the balance of passion. Sympathy naturally shares feelings, emotions, forming the baseline of all social bonds and moral judgments. The impartial spectator, people judge them by imagining an objective, neutral, outside looking, which acts as an internal moral compass. So it's effectively we're trying to figure out whether our actions are just or unjust from a neutral third party, the passions. Moral actions require balancing selfish urges with social concern so that an outside can fully sympathize with your motives. Approval and status, justice for justice to beneficiaries. Justice preventing harm with obedience is the absolute core that keeps society from falling apart. While charity and kindness add extra value. So kind of like what a lot of people make the mistake is they think that when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, they thought that was the only thing they were supposed to read. No, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments to complement The Wealth of Nations. He was never advocating for a purely degenerate, immoral system with no limits. And, kind of, they kind of complement each other. One aspect. Okay, my bad, guys. Okay, for some reason my clicking is not working. Oh my guys. So they kind of complement each other and they build on each other's architectures. Okay, so in simple layman terms, right? What does this have to do with optimization, optimizing for doing all this different stuff we want to do, right? And what it simply comes down to, right, is that, if you're a maximally profit-seeking individual at the expense of others all the time, then you're just a piece of shit, pretty much. Okay, that's what that comes down to. You're just a fucking scumbag. Okay, I don't care what really anybody says. You might get ahead, but at the end of it, you'll just be by yourself. Okay, or the other alternative, right, is that you make money, you make a lot of money, you scale your income, you keep growing your income, you keep doing all these different things, but we have a consideration, and then that consideration builds other social bonds, with other social bonds build other structures, and then by definition, we build a society that is better off. So to answer your question, I love math, yes. Capitalism is immoral. Okay. Actually, more precisely, capitalism is morally forget what the word is. We have theology, ontology, philosophy. It's morally I forget that it starts with an A. It's amoral. It's not immoral. But amorality leads to immorality. So that means the baseline of capitalism is immorality. It just doesn't have anything built inside of it to account for human conditions and concerns. But amorality leads to immorality precisely because there's no sets of standards that are agreed upon by everybody. Does that make sense? Um, so yeah, I think this is gonna be all for this live stream for you guys. I think this is very straightforward question to answer. It doesn't require too much thought, right? It just that's the moral system that does not exist, rather, and that's why we live in what's called a mixed economy, right? There's this notion that we live in a pure laissez-faire free market capitalism is mostly nonsense. Okay, it's that's not the case, um, and effectively, that is life. This is how you will navigate life. And maybe to extend this conversation further, because he says the impending demise of capitalism. What do I mean by that? Well, the thing about capitalism, guys, capitalism has these things called externalities, right? All economies have unintended externalities. If you fire someone, they get hired somewhere else. If you increase your revenue, you take someone else's revenue. There's always an externality, a side effect of the market that re-manifests itself. That is inescapable. You can't do something in the market without an effect. So for every action, there's a reaction, whatever you do. So if that's the given case, right? We're kind of what I would describe as, there's a good book on this called The Post-Scarcity Society. Okay, I'll give you guys the author of this book. In the Post-Scarcity Society. Okay, guys, I haven't read a lot of these books in a long time. Or it's like late stage capitalism. I forget what it's called. Um, yes, Post Scarcity Anarchism by Murray Bakken. So Murray Bakken was a very famous environmentalist, very intelligent individual. Is an economic based on social. That's not really what he's kind of like a libertarian. I kind of don't really follow libertarianism anyway. So in post scarcity capitalism, if you will, the term is basically a capitalism in which there's so much abundance, there's so much production that the very mechanism of currency itself will cease to exist. So in other words, imagine a world in which everything has been optimized, everything, because capitalism is always optimizing production. It's always cutting costs. It's always lowering the price. And if you really imagine a system like this, at some point, the system would approach near zero pricing scale across the board, across most goods and services, simply because it's always optimizing. You can't run a system that optimizes the profit motive, because the profit motive always pushes down prices for the buyer. The other thing that kind of, I would say, breaks capitalism, if you will, is that AI, artificial intelligence, changes the labor contract between the capitalist and the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, as Karl Marx talked about it. The proletariat work for the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie buy all the land and everything else. They own all of it, while the proletariat sell their labor, right? So in this type of system, inevitably, as Marx talked about, Marx wasn't right, but he was right about that capitalism would eventually fail. And it's just simply because of the simple fact that the system that it's built on, it has nothing sustaining it. It's only built based off a social exchange system, right? So the moment that you can no longer, because this is the game of capitalism. The game of capitalism is mixing your time with your labor. You get money from your employer. You get money from your employer. You ideally make more money. As you make more money, you purchase more goods and services. If you become a capitalist, like the capitalist who started the business, which is an entrepreneur, then you buy land and you build passive income, and then you repeat the process. And then capitalism will keep doing this in as many markets as possible until either it approaches perfect optimization or it simply falls apart. And the reason why it's going to fall apart is really simple. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. Unless we figure something out, then it will fall apart because our tax base is based off labor. If we can no longer sell labor at a reasonable price to a capitalist, then that means the person who is trying to get money can no longer get money. That means they can't buy assets. If they can't buy assets, then that means that there's no way to become wealthy. If there's no way to become wealthy, then that means the whole notion of climbing to a higher wealth class will no longer exist. And we're starting to already see this day by day, year by year, decade by decade, right? Now we're seeing more content creators like me, and we're seeing people that are doing a lot of information-based businesses. A lot of people are selling coaching now. A lot of people are even the books we're selling now are just kind of like recycled material, the same stuff. Most wages are going down across the board. Most careers don't, they're even this notion of a career is almost going away. Like, there's not that many careers anymore. A lot of people are BSing ourselves saying there's still careers out there. There sort of is, but it's going away because if I'm your employer, why would I want to hire you when I could fire you and hire 10 different people who are cheaper than you and then replace you all with AI? That's the most logical thing to do. And that's what capitalism will do because that business won't stay competitive. It has no choice or it will die. It will sink. And a business is all about self-preservation and profit. So once enough jobs go low enough to where no one can pay their mortgage, once not enough people can find a way to make money, then either you're going to see rioting, you're going to see a lot of different stuff. You're going to see a huge change in the system. I don't know when it's going to happen. It could be in 20 years. It could be in 30. I don't know. But I would say if I was to give a conservative estimate on the lifetime of capitalism, I would probably say at least the capitalism as we know it is going away in about 20 years. I would say I would give it 20 to 25 years. Whatever's going to be left is probably going to be basic service level jobs, maybe waiters. Doctors will still be around, maybe researchers will, like, all the jobs we have will still be around, but it's going to be more like a hobby, right? If you want to work, it will be a hobby. You won't have to work, which is a good thing because then you can kind of just do whatever you want pretty much. And the simplest reason why this is the case is like some people say, oh, Drew, you don't know what you're talking about. Work, we will always work, right? And that's an interesting thought. They're going to say that. And I'll say to that, yes, you will always work. You will always do things for your interest. You just won't get paid anymore because there's no reason to pay you. There will be no way to really exchange currencies anymore. It could be that maybe you get $3,000 a month or whatever. I'm not sure how it would work. Or maybe that the production value of what's given from AI will be taxed and then be distributed to all the citizens as a collective wealth fund. Maybe that's another possibility. I really don't know what it's going to look like. I really don't want to live in that type of world, but it's probably what's going to happen, unfortunately, because there's just simply no logical solution to fixing capitalism. You can't fix it. It's unfixable. Okay. Like we can even see this for software development, right? Once ChatGPT got released in 1 year to 2026, most junior level devs got laid off. The price of code went down by 95%. For example, I went on Craigslist and a guy's trying to hire a junior level developer for $13 an hour. Let that sink in. $13 an hour. It used to cost $95,000 to hire a junior level developer. Now I'm getting paid $13 an hour, right? So there's no incentive to learn code. Nobody cares. Think of like the textile factories and the cotton mill. It fired all the textile industry or most of it, and it streamlined it for the better. So I would say that the fundamental premise of living your optimized life will always be right, in the same way that working out will always be useful, eating well will always be useful, being a learner will always be useful. I want to do things that will always be valuable. What are the things that I can always do in any system, in any reality that will always have me winning, right? And if that's the case, then these are the things that I should probably do. So yeah, is capitalism going to fail? I mean, I wouldn't say it's going to fail because it's under the assumption that there will never be a dramatically diminished form of capitalism? The answer is there will still be capitalism. It just won't be dramatically reduced in probably like 100 years. There won't be like as many airplanes, believe it or not. In 100 years, we might not be flying anymore, right? We might be conserving diesel fuel. We might have to find other ways to replace gas in 100 years. There is not enough reserves of petrol on the earth to sustain our level of gas consumption, right? So something to think about. I don't think I'm going to be alive by the time we see this full evolution, but if you're in 100 years, society will be unrecognizable. 2126, everything as we know it will be gone. It will be unrecognizable. ChatGPT will probably be something that is unrecognizable as well as we know it, because it's iterative. Iteration is exponential. Exponential is unknowable. We're on an exponential growth curve that we just don't know where it's going. I hope this answers your guys' question. Please message me if you guys want coaching, and that's all I have for you guys. Thank you.